Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Marcus Oxley, the Managing Director of Resilient Solutions. I'm a disaster risk management practitioner, and this is the third of a series of learning labs where I'm explaining how disaster risk management principles can be applied to the way that we are responding and recover from the COVID-19. Let me share a screen with you. Today's presentation is, I'm going to call community resilience, the foundation of a resilient society. Okay. So as usual, let me just start with framing the context for the presentation. I'm still under lockdown in London. We've been in lockdown since the 23rd of March. It's having a huge social and economic impact on our society, but also we still are experiencing an increasing death toll. Today I heard it had gone past 40,000. Indeed, it could be one of the worst affected countries in Europe. And although it is a national pandemic, it is affecting different parts of the country and different social groups, particularly within our communities, in a very, very different way. And so, as we have no vaccine readily available and there's still a relatively low population immunity, there's still high levels of vulnerability and exposures within our society, it's likely that there will be localized outbreaks of the disease when the national lockdown is lifted sometime in June or possibly July. So the challenge really is, how do we get this optimum balance between being able to reduce the health impact related to the COVID virus, but at the same time minimize that social economic impact on our society. And doing that in a way that still maintains the public trust and the compliance with these government directives. So let me start with a little bit of the theory of disaster risk management. So I've mentioned this before, but this is the basic model that we use, whereby a disaster happens, we get a hazard coincided with a vulnerable society, and the way that we deal with that risk of that hazard, of that impact of that hazard, is we build capacities to offset the vulnerabilities and the exposures to that particular hazard. And this ability to absorb this impact of the hazard and to recover from that and to adapt to that going forward, this is what we call the property of resilience, and this is ability to sustain functioning, to sustain well-being when subjected to these extreme shocks and stresses. And historically, resilience was a lot to do with about bounce back ability, to return to the status quo. But I think it's increasingly also being understood as it's also about not just bounce forward, not just about surviving, but also about and thriving going forward. So this is an important characteristic to embed into our societies and into our communities. And I say community because it's often the case when a crisis happens that it's often people, local neighbours, local areas, organisations. They pull together, they work together, they collaborate to overcome these external shocks. So in this context, I'm calling community here people who are living in that same area, that are exposed to the COVID-19 virus, that are under the jurisdiction of the same local authorities, subject to the same national directives in terms of lockdown, and indeed, impacted by the social economic impact of these lockdowns on their society. So although this is a national epidemic affecting the UK, as I mentioned earlier, it's very clear that different parts of the area have very different levels of infection, and different social groups within those local areas also have very different levels of infection. So and that's related to the different vulnerabilities and the different, which means that there's different needs, different priorities, and also different capacities and sources of resilience. So it really is the one size fits all. The way we deal with this really isn't the most effective way to deal with that, because ultimately the COVID risk is configured locally according to those local vulnerabilities and exposures, and it has to be managed locally. So here I've just juxtaposed that in terms of a London borough, of inner city London, which has got very high infection levels, um, compared to southwest England, the county of Cornwall, where there's actually very low infection levels. And clearly, when you just look at some of the main facts and figures of those different areas, these are very, very different areas with very different risk profiles. And therefore, the way that we manage the risks within that area will very much depend on the local context. Um, so this point about managing emergencies down at the local level. This is recognised within the government's protocols, and it's also recognised within the UN system that makes the comment that as we try to build societal resilience, that we need to build that up from the local level. The foundation of a resilient society are resilient communities. I haven't got time to go through the principles and concepts here, but I will pick up on one or two of these further in the presentation. We'll keep going. But perhaps one of the most important points is that if we are to get this optimum balance right between what are the appropriate measures between, measures to deal with the health impact, whilst at the same time trying to reduce social economic impact, that differs significantly depending on the different risk profiles in those areas. So the decision-making processes as to what is the right balance has to be made by the primary bearers of risk, and that means local organisations and local people. They're in the best position to understand what their optimum balance is, what the critical trade-offs are. So we need to bring inclusive local risk government centre the stage to the way that we're managing this evolving COVID crisis. And that means we need to have inclusive risk government mechanisms, and these can be mechanisms that are adapted from existing emergency planning structures, local authority structures, health structures, but they need to have the characteristics of they need to organise themselves. They need to collaborate across a wide group of stakeholders. They need to be inclusive of high-risk groups particularly, and they need to be able to share knowledge, priorities, experiences, and co-create, learn together, and come up with appropriate, timely, responsive actions related to what the risk profiles are within their specific area, whilst obviously being connected to the national and to other neighbouring parts of the county. So these are some of those characteristics of disaster resilient communities. I've already mentioned this critical issue around governance and self-organisation, the ability to reflect, the ability to collaborate together, to be inclusive, connected outside of their immediate communities, but also, the importance about maintaining social cohesion and trust and compliance, which is absolutely critical to bring about some of these behavioural changes that we're trying to bring about. And we can hang these processes around these devolved management structures that we already have in the country. So my conclusion is that going forward now, inclusive local risk governance and these local arrangements, local community resilience, these are the heart really of being able to manage this virus in a way which minimises the excess mobility, excess mortality, and protects particularly the high-risk groups and understands those high-risk groups within those particular communities, whilst reducing the social economic impact, supporting that early recovery, maintaining the public support, compliance and trust that we need going forward. So these are critical areas, and this came out yesterday, and I just kind of think we need a more nuanced edition of this. Really, it's about being informed, it's about being prepared, and it's about acting early. Okay, I'm going to stop there, but thank you for your time, and please do share this if you think it's relevant. And the next module is going to be actually on the recovery process itself. So thank you for that 10 minutes.